All right, welcome back, YouTube. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to write your very own powerlifting program. And before I get into that, we got to crack open one of these bad boys. Oh yeah. And today I'm going to be going over what you need to know, and I'm trying to describe as much as you can get about writing your program, from when you should place your days, how many sets, how many reps, what accessories, how should you progress across the block. Obviously, every one of these topics could have an individual video with its own deep dive, and I'd love to make those eventually. But I wanted to just put something out for you guys that was somewhat general, that you could go and apply right now, and just go ahead and make your program, whether it be 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. I'm going to be going over all of that and what you need to know. So here we are on a sheet that I made up. It's pretty basic. It's similar to the ones that I give my clients, but it doesn't have all the features because those aren't necessary because we're just building our own program. What I like to have is a home page. This could be on the program page where you just put the max that you have or your estimated max. That way we can use that max to calculate some certain percentages for some back downs. So have a place where you can track your max within your program. I think that's important, as well as just a place you can see. That way, if you want to progress it, so you've got that there tracked. The first thing when you talk about when writing a program, and that really matters, is the days. We can get the sets, the reps, whatever, all that stuff right, but if the days aren't laid out right within your schedule, then the program isn't going to, live up to the potential that it could have. So whether we're doing 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, that's going to come down to you and your schedule. What I tell people that work with me is the program that's best for you is one you can adhere to. Adherence is number one when it comes to really any sport. So if 5 days a week is too much of a stretch for your lifestyle and your schedule, let's say you're busier with a job, family, hobbies, whatever, maybe do 4 days. Maybe do 3. You need to do some good introspection and be realistic with yourself if you can actually come into the gym and dedicate good effort to the set amount of days in your program. So for me, I'm always advocating do a little bit less than what you can think. Prove to yourself that you can do that layout. And then if you still have time for more and you want more, do that. So for the sake of that, I'm going to make a basic 4-5 day program. I'm going to show you how you could switch it from there. And then at the end, of this daily layout, I'll give some suggestions about what I would do to go down to 3 days. So like I said, first of all, we want to build it around your schedule. So what I like to ask people is, what is the day that you will have the best recovery and be able to have just more of a focus in the gym? If you've got a busy life, I wouldn't do it after your 12-hour workday and then you've got a family commitment and then you have something else to go to. That probably shouldn't be the day that you're doing heavy squat, bench, or deadlift. So I would try to put that primary, so what I would call the heaviest day, your primary day, on a day where you're better recovered. And from there, I would start the program and start the training week with that heaviest day. And that is because when we get to the end of the block, our week 4, in my case, I want the client to come into it recovered. And if you hit your heaviest primary first, that means your heaviest secondary days would come later in the week. Whereas if your primary is at the end of the week, you then would hit your week 4 secondaries before your week 4 primary. So if you get what I'm saying here, we want to bias recovery to begin with. And if you're someone that needs more of a stimulus and needs to hit something heavier on, let's say, a secondary day leading into your primary, we could go from there. But with most people, we're biasing recovery first. So we start the week with the primary session. So in a 5-day layout, what I'm typically going to do is split up primary squat, the primary squat and deadlift from the primary bench, just because we have more days, an option for more days. So I would typically start with primary bench. So we have bench day to start the week. I'm going to do just 1 count pause. And here I would do anywhere from a single to a triple. In this case, I'll just put a single in and some various back downs. I'm not going to get into the rep work. I'm still going to talk to you about laying out the week. So I would start with a bench day. From there, depending on who you are as a lifter, either the very next day or a day of rest in between, I would then move to doing your primary squat. And in addition to the primary squat day, I would either do primary deadlift or secondary deadlift. And this is going to come down to you as a lifter, and you have to ask yourself, am I able to deadlift really heavy after squatting heavy? Some people can, some people it's better. That way we have this just one really hard session, and then the next lower body session is secondary for both the lifts, and you just are able to recover better. But some people, if they're hitting a heavy squat, they can't do their heaviest deadlift. So this is going to be up to you in writing your program of what do I need as far as recovery. For the sake of this program, I'm going to do the primary squat and the primary deadlift in the same day. I find that when I start with someone, I like to bias a bit more recovery, so if we can have that first session, if we can have that first session being very challenging and front loading and keeping all of that intensity in one session, you have a whole week to recover. But like I said, a variation of this could be putting the primary deadlift on the other lower body day, having secondary deadlift on this day, and secondary squat, primary deadlift on the day. You get my point. So starting the week with the primaries, moving from there, I would then have a bench day to space things out. It wouldn't make sense to go bench, squat and deadlift, then squat and deadlift again, and then bench, and then bench. So either on Monday or Tuesday, depending on your schedule, I am going to put in another bench session. And I'll talk about variations once I get done with the weekly layout. But it's either going to be Monday or Tuesday. This is where scheduling comes in. If you're busy on a Monday, make this bench day be on a Tuesday. If you're busy on a Tuesday, make it on Monday. We're trying to fit in training into 5 days. So in this case, we're doing it on a Monday. I'm not going to have a Tuesday session. You could. It's then going to depend on what you need as far as recovery for this primary squat and deadlift session. So for a stronger lifter that's doing more weight, I'm typically going to bias more recovery. So I would actually put the squat and deadlift typically for the following lower body session. If they've got it on a Sunday and the lifter is someone who's a lot stronger, I'm going to give them more rest. So there's squatting, deadlifting on Sunday. I'm going to want to give them their secondary on a Wednesday because they're going to then have Thursday, Friday, Saturday to rest. That gives them 3 days. So lower body on Wednesday. And we're probably just going to have Tuesday off in this session or in this layout. And then lastly, where I would fit in the final bench day would be on Thursday because it just does not make sense to have that final bench day be on Friday. Why would we have a bench day on Friday and then bench again on Saturday? That is something that drives me crazy looking at some of these programs that coaches give out to intermediate and beginner lifters. You do not need a priming bench day the day before your primary when you're benching under 400 pounds. Even at 400 pounds, that doesn't make sense. We need to be recovered. You don't have a Noriega level arch. You don't have this super high arch bench press. Why are you benching the day before? Give yourself some rest. So this is an example layout for a 5-day-a-week training split with the primary bench being the first day of the week, primary squat and deadlift being the second day. I would say this is our secondary bench on Monday. Then we have our secondary squat and deadlift on the Wednesday. And then we would lastly have our tertiary bench on Thursday. Some variations of this that you could go with, like I said, would be, let's say primary deadlift switches to the Wednesday, and then you have secondary deadlift on this day. You know, if you're someone that's sensitive to squatting heavy, another way you can do this is if you're someone that you know deadlift needs a lot of recovery in general, and even just hitting a super heavy squat earlier in the week would tank your deadlift later in the week, I would make this be the secondary squat primary deadlift and primary squat secondary deadlift. Really, when programming, you want to be intentional with how can we set ourselves up best to recover and best to perform. So these are just some variations of things you can do within this layout. If you are doing a 4-day split but still trying to squat and deadlift 2 times, I would just take this bench session add it to this day or add these two to this day, whether you want to do it Saturday or Sunday. And I would make an SBD. If you're still trying to bench 3 times a week, squat and deadlift 2 times a week. And there's plenty of other variations you could go into. You could try like squatting a day, deadlifting a day, squatting a day, deadlifting another day. I am just going to keep it basic here because we're covering a lot of bases in this video. So this is a very good starter split that you can go with, and it's going to cover the bases for most of you. And then, like I said, if you want to go on 4 days, you could put bench on this session, make the primaries an SBD. If you wanted to do 3 days, you could add another one of these bench sessions to the other lower body squat and deadlift day. The only consideration, which we'll talk about later, is with those 4-day a week and 3-day a week splits, you're going to have to cut back on the accessory work. You just can't hit every muscle group twice a week when training 3 days a week. You're going to have to pick accessories that are the best bang for your buck. So now that we've established which days are which for the microcycle layout as far as squat, bench, and deadlift, let's talk about variations and accessory work on the day. Because before we even get to sets, reps, intensity, laying out this first skeleton of what we're doing is super important. Need a little another monster sip here to keep the brain waves going. So let's talk variation. For the majority of the year on our primary day, we're probably going to want to keep it comp, or in this case with bench, 1 count pause is comp because we have to pause in competition. So I'm typically going to keep these heavy days competition specific. If we're really far out in the off season and maybe we want to push like a pause single on deadlift for the primary day, that's something we can do. But I'm almost always going to keep these days comp. And if I want to do variation work, I'm going to do it on secondary or tertiary days. So that's how I do variations on primaries. Moving to secondary days, though, this is where we can have a lot more nuance about what we do as far as variations. So within my sheet, I have a list of different variations I can put in, and in the new sheets with my clients, I have a few more added to this. But basically, my go-to variations, starting with bench press, are going to be either a tempo bench, a long pause bench, a Spoto bench, or a Larson press bench. And there's many more variations we could get into, and there's so many different things we could talk about. That's its own video. But those are my go-tos because I've with my experience noticed that those cover most of the bases of things we need to work on with technique. So starting with a long pause, what I like about doing long pause bench is that it really reinforces keeping your arch and your tension as you're holding the bar on your chest. And a lot of people either lose their leg drive as they're holding their pause, or they lose their arch, or they lose upper back tension. And if you have to hold something for 3 seconds or 2 seconds, it's just going to really reinforce strength in that positioning, which will then help our 1 count comp bench. So I like that variation. I like tempo, and we can do something like a 3-1 tempo, a 4-1 tempo, a 3-2, a 3-3. Each one has different use cases. The longer we're tempoing it, the more we're going to be working on leg drive of keeping that arch up and keeping tension and keeping a good bar path. So that depends on how much we want to dial in that skill. And then the pause kind of just reinforces what we talked about with long pauses, where we want to just create a lot of tension in that pause position and be able to maintain it. I tend to go with 3-1 tempo. That's the go-to. But if a case where I really want to maybe have a load limiting variation, something like 3-second tempo, 3-second pause is going to reduce the weight a ton compared to a comp bench. But I tend to go with a 3-1 tempo. So tempo bench is great, reinforcing leg drive and having a good bar path throughout the movement. So if those are something you struggle with, tempo bench would be a good variation to implement. Moving to Larson, I really like Larson because, like feet up bench, pop the feet out. You can't rely on your leg drive because your feet are lifted off the ground, and you have to maintain your arch and your positioning in your upper body without that leg drive, which is its own challenge. It really works your ability to control the bar on the way down, as well as on the chest. If you've ever done this variation, it is challenging at first, but once you get good at it, your touch, your bar path, your overall control, all of it is even better when you bring leg drive back in. And then lastly, Spoto press is great. I tend to have my clients execute their Spoto 1/2 inch to 1 inch off the chest. And the big goal here with this movement is that we're pausing in the same place. You don't want to pause high off the chest and then low to the chest. You want it to be in the same spot every rep. And with that, it's going to really reinforce your ability to control your descent. A lot of lifters drop the bar to their chest, and if you have to stop the bar just before you hit the chest and pause it in that position, it is challenging. But once you get good at that, it's going to be so much easier for you to just softly touch the bar to your chest, and that's something I like to work on even with my benchers that sink into the chest, because even with them, you have to bring the bar to a complete standstill in competition before you get that press command. So it's really beneficial to be able to have that control in the bottom half of the movement. So those are the go-tos. Feet up bench is where you lift the feet up a lot higher in the air. And I'd say they're like, you increase the range of motion in the movement a lot more than Larson, where Larson, you just let the feet come out from underneath you. Feet up bench, I think, is better for hypertrophy. Larson, I think, is better for technique. How did I forget close grip? Am I retarded? Close grip's one of my favorites. I don't know why I was more so looking at the variations I like for technique, whereas close grip is just a great variation for building muscle and giving us some movement variability, because all these variations we're doing with the comp grip, whereas close grip is narrower. So I love close grip. And looking here, that's about most of the variations I would do on a regular basis. So based on the issues you have, you would then choose that variation. I hate when coaches pull variations out their ass just to give their client, oh, the whole team's doing Spoto now because I think that sounds fun. You should have a reason for why you're giving your clients a movement. So in this program, we're doing comp bench on this day, and we're going to do close grip on the secondary day, because this is a lifter that doesn't have as much muscle mass, and we want them to get a bit stronger, but also put on some muscle instead of just benching with this wider comp grip. So we'll do close grip on the secondary day, and this tertiary day, we're going to work on some tempo bench because their leg drive isn't as good as it could be, and their bar path needs some work. And we can then do tempo bench coming into the primary day to give us a technical boost onto this 1 count paused. And just a little final note here, as you get more proficient at these technical issues you're working on, maybe as you get a bit more muscle and we want to turn up the dial of specificity into a competition, I would eventually change these days to comp bench, but just for the sake of a starter program, I think it's good to have some of these variations in to work on whatever issue you have. Long-winded, but I want this to help you. If you're still watching, I hope that this has been informative so far. Moving to squat, same approach as the bench. You know, I would do a pause squat. I typically don't do long pauses on squat, but I would do a 1 count pause. That's one of my go-tos for squat variations, because 1 count pause is going to punish you if you descend too quickly. You can't drop into the hole really fast and then maintain a complete pause. So it reinforces better control on the way down. It also reinforces good positioning in the hole and then power out of the hole, because if you're able to come to a complete stop in the hole on a squat and then explode up while keeping positioning, you're going to be able to do that so much easier when you don't have a pause. So I love that variation. I also love tempo squat, and I would typically just do a 3-0-0 tempo. I don't have that in here right now, but it would be 3-second descent and then no pause. And I like tempo squats because, one, it allows us to stay over the midfoot better. If you've ever had to tempo your descent and you're on the heels or you're on your toes, the squat's going to feel really uncomfortable, and it's going to punish you for moving like that. So I would then give this variation to someone where their bar path might not be as good, and it just helps them to have that bar and the body weight over the midfoot. That way we are, technically in a better spot. Another use case I like for tempo is the fact that it can help with depth. Sometimes if a lifter's squatting high, the tempo can actually help them come down to depth better than just being so quick dropping into the hole. So that's another use case I like for tempo squat. And what else here? Other variations. I like high bar. High bar is great. Gives you a bit more range of motion. Also just gives you some movement variability. Can take stress off the elbows if low bar comp squatting gives you issues, among with other reasons I like it. I'm not going to go too in depth here because I feel like I've taken up enough time talking about variations. And lastly, SSB. SSB is good. It challenges the upper back. It's also just a different movement if that's something that you need at the moment, as well as it can be easier on the elbows than something like a low bar. So moving finally to deadlift, I have some variations that aren't in here that I'll talk about, but mainly what I like is pause deadlifts. Those are like the GOAT as far as deadlift variations go, especially if you're a sumo deadlifter. It really challenges your positioning off the floor, which a lot of people struggle with. And that's just the biggest people's issue. They lose positioning off the floor, they get to lockout, and their deadlift goes to shit. So I like pause deadlifts to challenge that. Another deadlift variation that I like, I don't keep it in for a long time, but I do like it in some circumstances, is tempoing on the descent. So some lifters will lose positioning or not have good positioning from the start of their set. So their first rep is off. And that's because they just don't know where to position their hips. And if we tempo the descent on a deadlift, your hips are going to be in roughly the perfect place they need to be to start the rep. So tempoing it on the way down, feeling that hip height, and then starting the next rep with that hip height really quickly teaches a lifter where their hips need to be. Obviously, there's other variations like block pulls. I don't tend to give those out unless someone's dealing with an injury and we need to reduce range of motion. Another variation would be like an RDL, but I'm going to treat that more of like an accessory. Sometimes we can do beltless. Beltless is good just from the standpoint of helping the lifter get into slightly better position, as well as just feel the movement out more technically. Sometimes lifters just rely too much on the belt, and that either hinders their technique, or in some cases the belt is too tight and they're not able to get in as good of a position, and beltless can help that. But typically, like for you, beginner program, I'm just going to do a comp deadlift and then a pause deadlift. And then when we want to drive the comp deadlift up, and if technique is really good, we can just do 2 comp deadlift days. So that's it. There's variations. I'll quit yapping, and now we can talk about how I would want to lay out accessories within this layout. So if you're a powerlifter, chances are, you're somewhat newer. By newer, I mean like 5 years or less. You're not in this for 10 years and you're completely jacked. You don't look like Russell Orhe. You need accessory work. And I'm a big advocate for doing a lot of accessory work, especially if you have the time in the gym to do it. I think far too many people either wimp out, pussy out on their accessory work. They don't push it hard, or they skip it. And both those things do not lead to actual meaningful muscle growth. So for me, within the way I train, the way I program, I like a lot of it. So my goal, especially in a 5-day-a-week layout, is to try to get 2 different movements per muscle group per week. So for example, I would want to hit chest twice a week from an accessory work standpoint. So something like a chest press and then maybe a pec deck or a weighted dip and a dumbbell bench. And I try to hit that 2 times a week. With lower body muscles, I'm typically not doing 2 times a week and maybe 1 time a week, like adductors. If we're ready squatting and deadlifting twice a week, the adductor gets pretty beat up from that I'm probably not going to do 2 sets of adductor machine, but I will do at least 1 movement per muscle group per week for the lower body. So let's get into that. But I just wanted you to know accessory work is huge. And if you're not getting better and all you're doing is squat, bench, and deadlift and a couple bicep curls, this could be the key. And you may just need more accessory work and to push it harder. So here's the layout. So I'm going to follow a pretty traditional upper-lower split for accessories. So for this first bench day of the week, I'm going to do something like a weighted dip, and that would be the first chest movement of the week. And then for my second chest movement of the week, I'm going to do a chest press on this secondary bench day. From there, we could either do back and then like arms and shoulders, or we could do arms and shoulders and then back. Typically, I do back earlier in the workout just because it's harder and we don't want to do it at the end when we're more fatigued. So for back, from a hypertrophy work standpoint, we want to hit upper back and we want to hit lats. And I like to separate them because if we don't, a lot of movements have overlap and then they're redundant. That's a whole nother discussion. But I'm always going to have some type of chest supported row. It's just always going to be better than something without a chest support from a hypertrophy standpoint. And we can have one of them be like a wide grip machine row, and then another one be like a wide grip T-bar row, you know, giving you some variation. All right, I had to edit this real quick. So weighted dip, chest supported row. Over here, we can do, if we're doing upper back first, we can do lats first over here. So we can do a lat pull down. And then here we can do another lat pull down. If you could do lat pull downs twice a week, they're really good. Or you could do like single arm lat pull downs or lat pullovers. But I'm just going to put lat pull down again. Not everyone has access to a lot of machines. And then here we can do a T-bar row. And to make this clear, you can do the same movement 2 times a week. Like a lot of people are like, oh man, it's got to be something different. I need to target a different muscle fiber. Like, shut up. You are probably not in the position where you have that much muscle that you need to be worried that much about nuance. So you could just literally do chest supported rows twice, lat pull downs twice. I do think it's a bit more enjoyable to do something different. That's why I would do like a weighted dip and then a chest press, but understand that. From here, I would want to then hit a shoulder, a bicep, and a tricep. So here we could just do a tricep push down. Gosh, I can't type. A tricep push down, and then here we could do a single arm tricep extension. And yeah, bro's bad at typing. And then we could do a dumbbell lateral raise, and then the other one we could be a like machine lateral raise or a cable. It's because I've got my mic in front of me, and then my keyboard's like further away from me, so I'm not typing how I normally would. This is me coping. And then we can finish off with a bicep. I love preacher curls. I think they're the best. More stability. And then you can just do a dumbbell curl. So there we are. That is literally, might be controversial in the powerlifting world. That's all you need. If you hit every muscle group twice a week and train it hard, we're going to get into sets and reps here in a minute. That's pretty much all you need for hypertrophy work within a powerlifting context. There's some cases where you could do a muscle group 3 times a week to bring it up. Like I could maybe see us trying to add biceps, but if you're already deadlifting twice, that's using the biceps in a small way, at least just in the fact that we're pulling, it's kind of like indirectly how you may use a bicep. I mean, it's not super prominent, but I wouldn't do 3 bicep movements if we're also deadlifting twice a week. I think it's a bit much, but you could maybe add a shoulder, maybe another tricep. But if we're benching 3 days a week where the bench uses pecs, shoulders, triceps, we don't need to be doing 3 of these accessory, like 3 shoulder movements on top of that. So literally, I believe this is all you need to really get the most out of hypertrophy work within a training program for powerlifting. Now, if we wanted to split it up a bit more and put some of it on Thursday, I could move like the tricep and shoulder to this day, and then this just be chest, back, biceps, full upper body here, and then just like bench with some triceps and shoulders. You can move that around that way. It's not just 4 long workouts and then literally just bench. So in that case, for you to have it be a little more spread out, triceps, shoulders, biceps in the same session, in this third session, but that pretty much covers our upper body days. Trying to hit each muscle group twice a week, trying to bench 3 days a week, and depending on how hard we push the bench, I may even scale back on like the dips. I may make that like a chest press and this a cable press around. That way it's a little less fatiguing. Moving on to lower body. If we have primary squat and deadlift in the same session, I'm typically going to make these accessories a little bit easier. So something like a leg extension and a hamstring curl, as opposed to a hack squat and an RDL. Because if you're already doing heavy squat, heavy deadlift, it's just going to be tough to then lock in again for a heavy hack squat and heavy RDL. If you've ever done these movements, you know how hard they are. So I'm going to do a leg extension for quads and a hamstring curl. You can do seated or lying. And then from here, we can add a few different things. Maybe we could add some core work on this day. Maybe an adductor machine. You could hit calves. Let's be honest, you're not going to, but you could add calves in here. But there's quads, hamstrings, adductors, calves, and then glutes. So here we could just then do like a hip thrust. Now, a disclaimer, this is for trying to get the most out of hypertrophy with the big lifts. You may not be able to handle doing all of these and squat and deadlift. I'm just going from like a hypertrophy maxing standpoint. If this session's already getting long, you could cut out the adductor and hip thrust. We're already getting a good bit of adductor and hip in deadlift and squat. So if this workout's just getting long, these can get cut and you can literally just do leg extensions and hamstring curls. So we're hitting each muscle group once here with this split, and then, or on this day. And then from here, I'm probably going to have a more challenging quad and then hamstring accessory, because this is now our lighter squat and deadlift day, and we have more recovery. So from Wednesday, we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday before we come back to Sunday. And typically on the session where we have more rest coming into the next lower body session, we can push a more challenging accessory. So I'm going to do a hack squat and a barbell RDL. Those are challenging. Now, if this were on Thursday and we only had 2 days rest coming into Sunday, I would probably then put like the hack squat and the barbell RDL on this session. There's so many different ways you can go about this. And as a coach, I would need to talk to the client and have check-ins with them to understand where fatigue levels are at. Understand this is just a basic program. This could change a lot depending on the person and how they experience fatigue from the main lifts and in general. So hack squat, RDL, that's going to be about all you need because these are compounds and they cover a lot. I would throw in a calf if you're not doing calves on here. And that's about it. We could do an additional quad if you want to do like a split squat, but we're already squatting twice a week. We're already getting leg extensions here. We're already doing hack squat. This is about it. So before we get into accessory work, rep ranges, we're going to go into the comp lift rep ranges and how I program reps. Roughly, we'll go into reps, and then we'll go into the accessory rep ranges, and then we'll go into intensity finally from there, planning out this first week, and then we'll finish off the video talking about progression from weeks 1 all the way to 4. So let's talk about rep ranges and set counts. This varies so much due to each individual, but there's some basics that we can start with. Typically, as a rule of thumb, the less advantaged the lifter is leverage-wise, the lower reps and the lower sets they're going to be able to handle. So if you're someone that's really tall and squat is a challenging movement for you, it beats you up, you've got a huge range of motion, I'm typically going to do less sets, less reps. Or if you're someone that's got a huge arch on bench press, a really small range of motion, you can just handle it. You can do a lot. We're typically going to have higher reps in the training, higher sets, because you can handle more. So coming down to sets and reps, it's very individual based on what the person can handle and what they need to grow. So what I'm going to lay out here is going to be for someone kind of in the middle. You're not super well advantaged as far as leverages, but you're not super disadvantaged. You're just kind of okay at everything. And we're going to be more in the middle. And then for you, you can kind of determine of, am I well leveraged? Do I have a short range of motion? Do I have a large range of motion? And from there, you can either, add a rep to the set or 2 reps or take a rep away. So typically in powerlifting, we're going to do singles on bench, but sometimes this primary day top set could be a double or a triple. I'm going to keep it a single for the sake of this block. For back downs, I'm typically going to do 3 to 4 sets and of about 5 reps on this day. An additional thing I might do would be I'd have another top set of maybe 5, and then I would do back down 5s. So it could either just be 3 straight sets, or we could have a top set and some back downs. There's a lot that could go into the depth here, but this is a basic program. So that's the primary bench. We're going to go to secondary bench before we go to squat and deadlift. Typically for this secondary bench day, it's going to be slightly higher reps than the primary. So top set, if we're doing a single, we could do a triple for this with close grip. And then I'm going to also do 3 to 4 sets of bench. We're just going to go with 3. We don't need to push to 4 at the moment, and 6 reps because we're going slightly higher than that. And then finally, the final day, I either go one of two ways. I'll either go like a basic, like we could do 3x3 if we're doing tempo in this program's case. Sometimes I'll do like a long pause or a tempo bench, and I'll do a single to prime this day. It really depends on if the lifter needs more recovery coming into this session or more stimulus. So if I'm doing the single, 3-count single, and maybe some comp back downs, I do something like a 3x7, and this would be pretty light, keeping the trend of doing more reps as the days get lighter. But for the sake of the original example with using a tempo bench, I'm not going to have the priming single, and I'm just going to give them a 4x3 of a 3-second tempo, 1-second pause. It's going to be easy. So that's a basic bench layout. So many different ways you can go with it. If you're well leveraged, this could be like a 3x7 to 3x8. This could be a 3x6 on the primary day. If you're not, you've got a big range of motion, this could come down to like 4s or even triples. And this could be something like 5s or 4s. You can go many different ways with this. Now, moving to squat and deadlift, I am typically going to go with a top set of 3 to 2 to 1. I like to go triples for one block, doubles for another, singles for another. With the really poorly leveraged people, I may not push higher reps. I may keep it at lower reps for more of the year just to save them. But for the sake of this being the start of a macro cycle where we would just do like 3 different blocks, I'm going to go with a top triple. Same for the deadlift, a top triple, 1 set of 3. We're not doing anything fancy with fatigue singles. Forget that shit. You just need to get strong, put on muscle, and you can worry about fancy programming strategies once you have a decent baseline. So moving to back downs, I'm typically going to do 3 sets. Like I said, if the person's less advantaged and more beat up, I may just do two back down sets. If the person's really efficient, maybe I'll do 4 sets of a squat. Typically, I'm not doing 4 back down sets of a deadlift. And then here, this would be anywhere from like 4 to 5 reps. We'll just do 5 for this example. Deadlift, I tend to do slightly less reps. It's a more fatiguing movement, and we can actually get a lot of deadlift strength from just training the squat. So I'm typically not doing as many reps on the deadlift. Very basic primary day layout. You can get into these fancy multiple top sets, different back down schemes. We don't need to do that. This is a basic program. Moving to secondary squat, I'm typically going to do a variation top set. In this case, we'll just do paused for both. I like that as a starter. Works on the things I talked about earlier in the video. It's typically going to be more reps than the primary day. We can just do 1 set of 5 for both of these. And then I'm doing anywhere from 2 to 3 sets. Maybe 4, like I said, if someone just needs more to progress. I'm going to do 3 on the squat, 2 on the deadlift. Deadlift tends to need a bit more recovery. And we'll just do back down sets of 6 and deadlift back down sets of 5. But this could go all the way up to sets of 8. If someone's very efficient, it could be as low as 5, maybe even 4. If someone is not as efficient and the movement beats them up. Like I said, you get the point here. There's variation within it. So that's a basic rep layout. Now, we can move into accessories, the fun part, depending on who you are. I am typically doing 2 to 3 sets max. If your coach and your program is some lazy ass 4x12, 4x12 to 15, 3x15 to 20, I see this shit all the time. Fire them. They are lazy and they don't actually care about you getting muscle. They just give this lazy ass, 4 sets of 12 at RPE 7. Good to go. No, bro. The reason that you're not getting bigger is because you are half-assing these 4 sets of 12 and you can't actually push anything meaningful because you're tired. If you have 6 different 4x12s and a freaking compound in the same day, you're not pushing all those sets hard. So I like to do 2 sets for pretty much everything. Sometimes 1 set if we're already pushing a lot of the comp movement. So 2 sets of dips, 2 sets of chest supported rows, 2 sets of pull downs. We could do 3 sets of tricep push downs, lat raises, and curls. But if you're in a bit of a time crunch, you can just do 2. I'll just use 3 for this example. That's still on the higher end of set counts. But 2 to 3 for these bigger movements, I'm really only doing 2, not giving people 3 sets. Reps. I don't really ever go above 10 reps. I find that the higher we go in reps, the harder it is to truly push it to failure, because it just gets to this point where it's hard for you to just last that long under heavy load. Now, I think it's a little easier to push to failure with like a 12 rep set on something like a tricep extension as opposed to like a hack squat. If you've ever done a set of 12 or 15 or 20, I did like 500 for 22 on hack squat. You can scroll back on my Instagram and find that. It was hell. And the harder part was just lasting through the set. So I like lower reps because it allows us to push closer to failure more accurately and easier. If you have a set of 6, you're going to hit failure, and closer proximity to failure, closer. Because a set of 6 at failure, at rep number 5, you're 1 away. But if you're doing a set of 10 at failure, rep number 1, you're 9 reps away. So it's just easier to gauge. So I will go anywhere from 10 reps down to 5. For a bigger compound, it tends to be less reps. So for the dips, we could just say 7 reps and then 5 reps. First set would be 7, second rep would be 5. For these chest supported rows, we could do 8, then 6, and then same for pull downs. We can do the same thing for triceps. We can do the same thing for dumbbell lateral raises, and the same for biceps. The thing to understand with accessory work is not that it's, high reps for hypertrophy, low reps for strength. I hate that shit. If you look at the modern literature, going in closer proximity to failure is what's going to get you hypertrophy results. So if you push a set of 10 to failure and a set of 6, you're going to have very similar results. Same with a set of 12. But for me, I would way rather just push a set of 6 to failure than the set of 12. But if you want to do 12s, be my guest. This is just my approach. Some brief thoughts on this though. If going to a set of 6 just is hard on the joints on a certain movement and you find that doing slightly higher reps feels better, do that. Listen to your body. But this is my general approach. So I'm going to take the same rep scheme and set approach here with the dips, the chest supported rows, as I am with the chest press. Same thing for the T-bar row, the lat pull down, 8,6. And then I'm going to take the same approach with these push downs, lateral raises, and preacher curls. I would probably just do like 2 sets on this day, or this one be the day with like 3 sets of each and 2 sets of each here. But that's pretty basic. Now, moving on to lower body, I tend to bias slightly less sets just because squat and deadlift is just objectively more fatiguing than bench. But like a leg extension, we're going to do 2 sets. Hamstring curl, we're going to do 2. Adductor machine, 1 set to 2 set, depending on how fatiguing it is. But we can just start with 2, but some people, their adductors get fried from the squatting and deadlifting. So in that case, I do 1. Hip thrust, I'm just going to do 1 set because it's a hard movement and we're getting a lot of hips by squatting and deadlifting already. So leg extensions, 8 reps, 6 reps, same thing with the hamstring curl, same thing with the adductor machine, and then the hip thrust, I'm just going to do 6 reps. It's pretty straightforward. And then moving on to this second session, I'm going to do 1 set of hack squat because if anyone knows what pushing hack squats really hard feels like, 2 sets is tough after already doing a good amount of SBD volume. If you're someone that can handle more and you recover all right, push it to 2, but I'm going to start with 1. I'd rather just take that set really hard and go from there. Barbell RDLs, I think we can do 2 in this case, especially because we're only doing 2 back down sets of deadlift. The 3 sets of comp squat, 1 set of hack squat makes these pretty even as far as volume goes. Hope I'm making sense to you. I'm 45 minutes into this video and we've covered a lot. I think that means I need another sip of this lock-in juice. And then lastly, if you're a real one, if you actually care, you're going to do the 5 by 20 because 20 reps, right? More reps, more muscle growth. Sight, bro. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Did you not listen to me the last 15 minutes? It applies to every muscle. I also hate this shit too, where people talk about, oh, well, it's a smaller muscle, so we need to do more. No, bro. Your calf and your bicep, it's muscles. I'm not trying to be too reductionist here. Obviously, I'm not a scientist in the sense where I'm testing shit in a lab. But instead of being so focused on that crap, just train hard. If we want to do calves, I'd do 3 sets, 2 sets, 8, 6, 6. We're going to do 3 sets because we're not pussies and skipping calf work. There we are. Sets, reps, variations, movements, all laid out for you for your week of training. I'm going to keep the same reps and sets across the entire block. The only thing I'm changing from here on out is intensities. Now, in some cases, at the end of the week 4, I may cut a set on some movements. I may make some of them easier, but I'll talk more about the nuances of that as we get to that week. All right, the last thing to talk about here, and that is intensity. We've got the movements down as far as the daily layout. We've got the volume laid out as far as sets and reps, and now we can talk about intensity, the final component, and in many cases, I think the most important component to really tweaking a program to fit the lifter just right. Because if you have a difference of, let's just say, 10% of intensity across the week on a lift, like you're training in the 80% versus 70%, that can make a really big difference for a lifter on whether or not they're getting enough stimulus or if they're getting too much stimulus. So getting the intensity right as far as RPEs or percentage or whatever you are using is really crucial to get the most out of your block and strength progress. So we're going to go into it, what RPEs I like to prescribe, how I like to progress them across the block, what type of percentage drop downs I like to give people, and then what kind of percentage that I like to give people for volume work. So we're going to get into that with the compounds, and then I'll go into my intensities of what I like to give people for the accessory work across the block. So intensities, how are we going to program them across the block and on each session? Bench being a less fatiguing movement than squat and deadlift, we are typically going to start with a slightly higher intensity. So I'm going to start the block at about RP 6, and then this first back down would be either 6 or 7, depending on the lifter. If they're someone that needs a bit higher intensity and can handle a bit higher intensity, we do 7, but we'll just start with 6 because we're talking about the average lifter. And then for the back down, I'm going to drop anywhere from 5 to 10% on this. We'll go somewhere in the middle at 7% drop for this back down set. I'm going to fill out the entire week, and then I'll make some explanations about why I did each thing once the week is finished out. Squat and deadlift being slightly more fatiguing, I like to start the block at RP 5. And for the back down sets, I actually like it to be a percentage-based number based on your max. That way we control your progression across the macro on these primary days. So this would be where putting in your max would matter. That way we can calculate it. So we're just going to say this is a lifter with about a 400-pound squat, a 300-pound bench, and a 500-pound deadlift. And we're going to do some really fancy work in the sheets here. M round, you type in M round, and then you click on the weight you want to use. So we're going to use 400 as the example, as the max. And then we're going to multiply that by the percentage we want to be working within. So if you want to work within 60% of your max for these sets of 5s, you would do 0.6. Now, I think that's a bit low for most people. Average person, you're probably going to start the week 1 back downs at around 70%. And then you have this rounding function where you do comma, and then I'm going to round it by 2.5 pounds. And there, you have 60% of your max. The max, which would be 400 times 0.7, rounded up or down to the nearest 2.5. That brings us to 80. We're going to do the same thing for deadlift. M round, we're going to pick 500 over from this sheet. If you had it on the same sheet, you would just click that cell that it's in, multiply by, we'll do 70% again, round by 2.5. 280 and 350 would be your weights for this week 1, starting at 70%. And I'll talk about progression once we finish this weekly layout. So I like to start lighter rather than heavier. Maybe you're someone that you're eventually getting up to 80%, and that's what you need. It really depends on the lifter. Here on the secondary bench, I'm going to push this a little bit harder just because it's higher reps and it's a variation. So I may start with 6, maybe even 7. Keep saying 6, 7. But we're just going to stay with 6 here, and I'm going to do a percentage drop of, and I'll show you some cool calculations here. So if we're typically dropping 7, 5, 7, 10% from the same rep range, like a set of 5 to then a 3x5, I add an additional 3% for every additional rep. So if this was just to back down triples, I would also drop by 7%, but it's back down 6s. So I'm going to go from triples to 4, 5, 6. So that's 3 different reps that we're changing by, and I'm going to add 3% for every additional rep. So 7 plus 9 is going to give me 16%. So that's going to be about 16%, and this does depend on the lifter. Some people need their back down work to be a little bit heavier, so maybe we just drop by 13% or 10%. Some people need it to be a little lighter. This comes down to you, and you feel your body out. And if you're finding that these back downs are like RP 8 on the week 1, and if this triple really is at 6, then you maybe want to go a little lighter. But you just got to be honest with yourself. A lot of these people's RP6, the weight they choose, and they're like, yeah, it was at 6. It was really at 8. And if you're overshooting this first set and it's a percentage drop, then these back downs are going to be heavier than they need to be. So that's a rough drop. It's dependent on the individual, but that's a pretty nice standard drop for you guys. Moving on to the secondary lower body day, I'm going to do the same thing. Start at about RP5 for these top sets. And then I'm either, depending on the lifter, going to do also a percentage of their max like this, or if I want to have a bit more freedom, I would do another percent drop. So we'll just do the percent drop example for squat. From squat, I typically drop about 10% for the same rep range. So if we were doing a 1x5 down to a 3x5, I would do a 10% drop, but we're going to 6, so we're going to add the additional 3%. So it's a 13% drop in this case. And here we could just do a 10% drop if we wanted to, or we can do the prescribed weight. And I'll show you an example of how I would do that for the secondary day. So we're going to take that deadlift. And what I like to do is have the secondary day percentage be about 10% less than the primary day. So we were starting at, sorry, I clicked on that. We were starting at 70%, if you remember, starting the week at 70% for these back downs. So I'm going to have these secondary day deadlifts be at 60% to start the week. So about 10% less. But this comes down to the individual. Some people maybe need a little bit more on their secondary days, so maybe this percentage is higher, or you just do a drop down from whatever you took from the top set. An additional point, we know that paused lifts are going to be more challenging than comp lifts. So due to that, you might want to tweak the drop down percentage, but this should be fine. 13% drop should be fine. That should be enough of a drop for these to be quite easy. Moving to this session, I really want to control fatigue coming into the primary day. So I'm going to make this a prescribed weight for bench. Typically, I like to let lifters have RPE for bench because it can vary a lot. But coming into this primary day, I want them to be recovered. So I'm going to make these triples at about 70% of the lifter's max. It can vary a ton too. Like that's the thing that you're understanding here as we get later into this video, that there is a lot of nuance with a person's program, and what works for them is very unique. And if you want like dedicated help with your program, I coach. Obviously, you could apply for coaching, or you could reach out for a consultation call. I do also do paid calls where we go over your program or your technique for an hour, and I can give you whatever tips you need. So if that's something you're interested in, DM me on Instagram and we could figure that out. But 210 That's decent for tempos as a 300-pound bencher. We're going to get heavier across the macro, so if these weights feel really light, understand we're going to be progressing them. But this is roughly the intensity layout that I'm going to have for the main lifts. Now let's talk about progressing these intensities across the weeks. All right, sadly for you guys, we're gonna have to make my face a little bit smaller. Oh no. But my progression across the block, I've got them filled out here. That way we didn't have to fumble through doing that because I can't type. I'm typically gonna increase by 1 RPE per week. So 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, ending the block at 9. If we're at the end of a macro, so if we've had 3 or 4 consecutive training blocks, I'm going to push these to at 10. That way we can push something really hard. But for this first block, I'm going to end it at about a 9. For squat and deadlift, same thing. We started at a 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, as we get further into the training cycle, if we got down to doubles or singles, we could go to then RP 9 and then maybe finishing the macro at RP 10. But this is just an example of a first block. These can be pushed harder, but I like to, start with an 8 and then eventually push harder as we go. Now, same thing for these secondary sessions. We're just adding an RPE to each week. Now, percentages, I'm keeping the drop down percentage about the same. On this bench day, I want these back downs to be hard. So this is going to stay at 7, even if the top end weight is going to be a lot heavier because it's at 9. I still want these back downs to be harder. For these primary day back downs where they're a prescribed weight, I'm going to add 2% per week. I find that to be the sweet spot for lifters when we're progressing. When we go past that, my mouse is lagging. When we go past that and we're doing something like 3%, 4%, it just is too much. So you could just copy what you had here. Make sure when you're copying it, you click this, not the cell, because if you just copy the cell, it's going to alter that original homepage number. It'll change the J to an O or something. So copy this and then adjust the percentage. So 70 was the first week, and we're going to go up to 72, and then I have 74, and then 76% finishing the block here in this example. And then when you go to your next block, instead of starting at 70, you can start the next block at 72%. And then 74, 76, 78. And each block that you progress throughout the macro, you can start slightly heavier than the last, so you're controlling the rate of progression. I think that is such an underrated tool in programming that people are just all over the place from block to block. And if you can control that rate of progression better, you'll have better consistency in training. So 2% up per week. That's what I did here with this secondary deadlift. I just went up by 2%. So we're starting at 300, ending at 330. A reasonable change in volume per week. I see people varying 100 pounds in what they're doing on back downs, and that just doesn't make sense to me from a managing fatigue standpoint across the block. If you want to blow your load and go super heavy and then feel like shit the next 4 weeks, be my guest. But I like to have consistent training, and I like to be able to continue pushing instead of just ruining myself. So for the back down percentages, I'm going to keep them the same on this secondary bench day 2. We want to push this hard. The last piece of nuance would be on these secondary lower body days. So the RPE can depend. If you're someone where going really heavy on this first squat day or first deadlift day just ruins your back, ruins your hips, it's not worth going RP 8 on this session. I would have a back end deload and deload this final session and do RP 4 for the deadlift too. But if you're someone where you are recovered and you can still hit another heavy lift, I would go with it being at 8. It just depends on where you're at with fatigue. And this could even depend from block to block. If this was just super hard one block, take this session a little easier instead of pushing this super hard, not even hitting a very good lift, and then just fatiguing yourself even more coming into your next training block. Now, as far as these back down percentages, I most of the time will have this percentage be higher than the previous week. So if it was at 13%, I'm going to do 15 or 16% drop, because typically just what naturally happens is the lifter takes a their jumps from week 1 to 2 to 3 are pretty even, but then because they hit this really big top set to end the block, their fitness is elevated, and then they come into this final session with this higher elevated fitness, and then they jump like 50 pounds, 40 pounds from what they were taking on this week 3. So due to this huge influx of intensity coming into this next week 4 secondary session, I make the back down percentage be a higher drop because there's such an influx. And even with the higher percentage drop, it ends up being more weight than what they took on the week 3. So that is my progression. For people I coach, I like to give them a weight range. So for this person who's like a 500-pound deadlifter, for their triple, maybe our weight range is 440 to 450. And we would just want to do weight ranges for what they should hit across the block. If I were you, I would try and plan out the goal you want to hit on this week 4 and then work your way backwards. So we can just use deadlift, for example. Typically, we're going to take a bigger jump from the week 3 to the week 4. So we could do 410 to 420. And then this week we could do 390 to 400 as our goal weight. And then this week we could do 370 to 380. So 450, 420, 400, 380. That's a decent progression. Depending on how good the lifter is at reps, maybe they go a little higher or a little lower. Yeah, I would plan this out before you start your block. That way you can have something in mind instead of just being like, oh, I've got an RP6 bench today. Let's load that shit up. And then you hit RP8 on week 1, and then you can't progress the weight you took on week 1 for the next 3 weeks because you got too greedy. Don't do that to yourself. Instead, plan out a progression like this and stick to it. Or you can be a lifetime intermediate forever. Be my guest. Or you can join the team and I can do all of this for you. You don't have to think about it and I can help you out. But that's roughly the progressions. Typically, I'm taking bigger jumps from the week 3 to the week 4 on all the days, just because fitness tends to elevate right as we come into the week 4. But that about covers intensity. If I were to go from like the heavier macro cycles where we're eventually hitting like 9, I would keep this 5, 6, 7, but then jump from RP7 to RP9 for this week 4. And then if I'm going RP9 to 10 on it, I would do RP8 that week, RP7 this week, and RP6 to start the block. So it just really depends on what we want to hit on the final week that then determines what we hit on the earlier weeks. I like to build my way and work my way back based on what I want to hit to end the block. I think that's a much smarter way to go about it. That covers the compounds. Let's finish it off with accessories and then my final thoughts and considerations. This is so sad. In this hour, I've gone through my lock-in juice. This is my second one of the day. I'm going to need to get to like 5 monsters a day to really ascend. But intensities for the lower body. I'm going to snap my fingers and this sheet is going to be uploaded. Voila, now they're filled out. So the way I am approaching accessory work largely depends on how fatiguing the movement is. And some people may disagree with that, but I think that these single arm, like let's say you have a single arm tricep extension, is just going to be more fatiguing than a hack squat. And if you would disagree with me about that, maybe you're retarded. But a way to dip, I'm typically going to start with an easier progression, like RP7 and RP8 compared to 8 on these different movements. Now, I find that we need to push the accessories harder throughout the entirety of the block because we're doing less sets. If you're doing a 4x12, you probably can't go to failure on every set. Otherwise, you're just going to be cooked. But with these 2-3 set approach, maybe 1 set, we got to go a little heavier. And we got to be a little more intentional. So make sure that you're pushing these hard, because if you have just 2 sets and you're just BSing your way through it, and I have it prescribed to RP8, but you're really doing it at RP5, got 5 reps in the tank, you aren't pushing hard enough. So make sure they're pushed hard. I'm progressing from 8 to then RP8, 9, 9, then RP9, and then RP10 on the final set for these easier movements. Slightly harder movements like the dips, the rows, the pull downs, I'm probably going to end at about a 9. These lower body movements like leg extensions, hamstring curls, adductor machine are going to follow a fairly slightly easier progression. I just find that these compound squat and deadlift movements really beat you up. So I'd go RP 7, 8, 8, then RP 8, 9 for the final set. Hip thrusts, same thing, same progression roughly. And then obviously chest press, lat pull downs, T-bars, we're following the same progression for these accessories that we would with these ones later in the block. And I think the most nuance comes into how you program the lower body accessories on the final lower body session of the block. So if we have a hack squat, a barbell RDL, and calves, and we get to this week 4, and we've already hit some big top sets on this day, heavier back downs, big accessories where we're pushing to RP 9, and then maybe you push an RP 8 set of 5 on squat, and then an RP 8 set of 5 on the deadlift, you might be cooked by this point in the week. And then also pushing an RP 9 hack squat might just be too much for you. So in that case, I'd maybe deload on these hack squats. I would maybe even deload on these RDLs, just make these a bit easier. But if you still have gas in the tank, don't pull back. Why waste a training session? So I would still push this if you aren't completely wrecked from these movements, but it's really just listening to your body. So that about covers it as far as accessory work. If a movement really beats you up, just start a little bit easier with the RPE and progress it a little slower. If a movement doesn't and you can just push things harder, start with a slightly higher RPE. Though I really wouldn't be starting the block much higher than RP 8 for anything. Even movements like these curls, tricep extensions, lateral raises, I think it's good to give yourself a bit of a break for a week, because the very next week we're getting into RP 9 for the second set. You're 1 rep shy of failure. And I find like you don't see a lot of sets of at RP 10 when you push to true failure on a movement, not what you think is failure where you've got 4 reps in the tank, but really failure. It's very fatiguing, and the subsequent sets in the workout just reduce in quality. So if you're going to failure on dips and then failure on chest supported rows, it takes a lot of mental investment, a lot of like psychological arousal, and then these just subsequent sets aren't as good. Whereas if we just stop 1 rep short or 2 reps short, we can handle a lot more in the workout. So that's just my general thoughts. So I just want to say thank you for watching this far. This has been an over an hour long video breaking down how you can make a program. If you just wanted to run this as a standalone program, not doing multiple blocks, I would just do singles on that primary squat and deadlift day, along with like the single on bench where you can just keep pushing that top end. You could go finish the block RP 8 one block, then RP 9, then RP 10, or you could just be running it to RP 10. As pushing this block really hard. It truly depends on what you want to get out of it. But I hope that this was insightful as far as laying the week out, choosing variations, choosing sets, choosing reps. Like I said, it comes down to you as an individual of, are you better leveraged for a certain movement? Are you poorly leveraged? Can you handle more intensity? Can you handle more volume? How do you respond? And you're just going to have to ask yourself that to truly be objective in making these changes. If you think that you're someone that struggles with being objective and you're not sure of, well, how many sets should I really do? What variation works for me? How can I handle intensity progressions across the block? Am I starting too heavy? Am I starting too light? If you need guidance, let me know. I mean, unofficially, you can just DM me on Instagram and ask you questions. I love to help people, and I will get back to you. If you've got questions, ask them below in the video. You don't even have to pay me for some of these basic questions. I would love to help. But if you want something really in-depth and a lot of help, you saw the depth I went to in this video. This is the type of nuance and detail I like to go into with my clients' programs and with the feedback that I do with my coaching. I'm taking people on. If you need help with training, let me know. I've got an application in my Instagram bio, or just shoot me a DM. I'd love to work with you. If you are a good fit, we can see if we're a good fit, chat about it. But I hope this helped. I love doing this. This is really fun to do this deep dive. And if you got any questions or different videos or different topics you want to cover, leave them in the comment sections. But otherwise, peace out.